In 1995, Packard Bell was the largest seller of personal computers in the United States, ahead of Compaq, ahead of IBM, ahead of Apple. The company had come from nowhere in a decade, and almost nobody who bought one of its machines had ever heard of the man who built it. This is the story of how that happened and what it cost. 10 years earlier, in 1985, a 32-year-old man walked out of a negotiation with a company called Teledyne, having bought something that did not exist. He had not bought a factory. There was no factory. No patent came with it, no product, no single machine, no employee. What he had bought was a name. 2 words that had belonged to a radio maker in the 1930s, and that nobody had put on anything for years. He paid less than $100,000 for it. His name was Beny Alagem. He had come to California from Israel, and when he was asked later why he had spent his money on 2 words, he said the name had a history behind it, and in his own words, a good name for quality products. He was buying the way it would look on a shelf. The pitch his company made afterwards put recognition of those 2 words, Packard Bell, at around 70% of American adults. The following year in Chatsworth in Los Angeles, he incorporated a computer company around them, with 2 partners, Jason Barzilay and Alex Sandell. In 1989, it sold $600 million of computers. 2 years later, $700 million. The year after that, $900 million. By 1993, $1.25 billion. Then in 1994, it sold $3 billion of computers. And by 1995, no company in America sold more. Number 1, Compaq, IBM, and Apple were all behind it. And Beny Alagem was still a stranger to the families buying his machines. There is one thing this company did that nobody else was doing, and it is the reason it grew that fast, and it is also the reason for everything that happened afterwards. It is not a technology. There is no invention anywhere in this story. It is where the boxes were sitting. In the middle 1980s, a personal computer was sold the way a photocopier was sold. A dealer, a salesman, a demonstration, a purchase order. The buyer was a business, the seller knew the product, and the machine arrived with someone to set it up. That was how nearly all of it worked. Tandy sold computers in its own Radio Shack stores, which was the one real exception in retail, and Tandy was selling its own machine in its own shop to a customer who had come in for a machine. Alagem put his machines somewhere no other computer maker would put them: Sears, Wal-Mart, Price Costco, Montgomery Ward. Not a specialist dealer, not a mail order catalog of the kind Gateway 2000 ran, not a direct phone order of the kind Dell ran, not a sales force calling on corporate accounts. The same shop floor that sold the washing machine to the same customer on the same afternoon. As the decade went on, the electronics chains followed him in, and Circuit City and Best Buy sold these machines by the million alongside the warehouse floors of Sam's Club. The people who bought them were families who had never owned a computer and did not know anyone who had. They were not weighing an Intel 486 against the new Pentium. They were standing in a store on a Saturday looking at a box with a familiar-sounding name on it, and the name sounded like a company that had been making good things for a long time. By 1992, this company held about 26% of everything sold through that retail channel. Within a few years, it held over 45%. It had not beaten the industry, it had walked around the side of it and sold to people the industry had never spoken to. The machines were built to that logic all the way down. A Packard Bell arrived with everything already on it, because a family opening a box on a kitchen table could not install an operating system. It came with a custom front end called Navigator, which sat on top of Windows 3.1 and later Windows 95, and which drew the machine as a set of rooms in a house, so that someone opening it for the first time could find the word processor by walking into a study rather than by knowing what a directory was. Navigator was a genuine piece of interface design, a knowledge graph of the home desktop, built for people who had never used a desktop. It was, in the most literal sense, the first computer in the house. For a very large number of American families in that decade, this was the machine the children learned on. Now the numbers, because the speed of this is the part that is hard to believe. United States market share of 5.3% in 1992, fourth largest supplier in the country. 6.7% in 1993, still fourth. Revenue of $1.25 billion that year against $900 million the year before. Then $3 billion in 1994, which is more than double the year before it. And in 1995, nearly 13% of the entire United States personal computer market and first place. 47% of every personal computer sold through a retailer in America that year was this one. A company 9 years old, built on 2 words that had cost under 6 figures, was outselling IBM in its own country. The rest of the industry did not sit and watch that happen. Compaq had already built a consumer line called the Presario in 1993 for exactly these shops. IBM brought out the Aptiva in 1994. Hewlett-Packard brought the Pavilion the year after that, HP entering retail as a direct response to what Packard Bell had built. AST Research, DEC, Micron, Toshiba, and Sony were all in the same aisle or trying to get into it. Every machine in it was an IBM PC compatible, sold to a family, on a shelf, at a price. Packard Bell had made that market. Now it had to hold it against the largest manufacturers in the world, and one of them was about to stop competing on the shelf and start competing in a courtroom. Now the thing that came back the other way, not the box it shipped in. The machine itself held flat against a chest, across a car park, in through the doors, and up to a counter near the front of a Sears, a receipt in a pocket, and a refund at the end of it. Through most of the 1990s, that walk to the counter happened often enough to decide the fate of the company whose name was on the lid. A shop will take a computer back from a customer who has changed their mind. That is what a shop is for. The question is what the manufacturer then does with the machine, and there is a question buried in it that nobody was asking out loud in 1995. A machine on a shelf competes on the price on the front of the box. So what does one of them actually cost to build, and what is it being sold for? Hold that. It gets answered in audited figures at the end. On the 10th of April, 1995, Compaq Computer Corporation sued Packard Bell Electronics in federal court in Delaware. The complaint alleged false advertising under Section 43A of the Lanham Act, unfair and deceptive trade practices under Delaware law, and unfair competition. What Compaq alleged, in substance, was that Packard Bell was taking computers that customers had returned, pulling the parts out of them, putting those parts into machines it then sold as new, and telling nobody. 10 weeks later, at a trade show called PC Expo in New York, Compaq's senior vice president for North America stood in front of reporters and talked about the company he was suing. His name was Ross Cooley, a senior executive whose remarks were about to become a story in themselves. The Associated Press wrote down what he said. He said Compaq had studied every single thing problematic to Alagem's business model. He said lawsuits have an adverse impact because Packard Bell's profit margin is slim, and added he has to raise prices. And then he said that Alagem had been unable to take the company public because investors feared that if he and his senior executives were to cash out, what would be left would be nothing but some Mexican factories and 4 Chinese engineers. That report ran in newspapers across the country. Packard Bell sued Cooley personally for defamation 4 months later. Something else went out from Compaq's side that summer in an envelope, and it did more damage than the lawsuit did. What was in it comes shortly. Now the accusation itself, carefully, because this is the part that is usually told wrong. The federal judge hearing the case set out the background in his own words, and the first thing he established was not about Packard Bell at all. Because the return rate in the personal computer industry is high, he wrote, And because many returns involve computers that are unopened, unused, or used without permanent damage, some, if not all, personal computer manufacturers recycle parts from these returned computers into computers sold as new. Manufacturers that do this, he wrote, develop tests to distinguish parts that are new from those that are not. The practice was industry-wide, and the court says so in the first paragraph of its factual background. Packard Bell admitted that it recycled parts from returned computers. Its position, as the court recorded it, was that it disassembled and tested every component from every returned computer to ensure that each one was new or equivalent. So the dispute was never whether this company reused parts. It admitted that in open court. The dispute was whether it was telling those parts apart. Compaq's allegations on that point were specific. It alleged that Packard Bell made no effort to distinguish new parts from used ones. It alleged that employees removed serial numbers and date codes to hide manufacturing dates and prior use. And it alleged that employees sometimes used erasable, programmable, read-only memory chips to camouflage a given computer's true age. Every one of those is an allegation. No court ever ruled on them. The two actions were argued as one, and Judge Roderick McKelvey published his opinion in the consolidated case on February 2, 1996, reported at volume 948 of the Federal Supplement. A separate discovery fight ran on the other coast, where a magistrate judge named Infante spent July of 1995 ruling on subpoenas the litigation had aimed at a company that was not a party to it at all, Acer America. The argument about what was inside a Packard Bell had reached a third manufacturer's filing cabinets. The lawyers were the smaller exposure. The envelope is where this stopped being a fight between two companies. After filing, Compaq's attorneys wrote to 10 state attorneys general. The letters repeated the allegations of the complaint, summarized the relevant state law on deceptive trade practices, and described part of the investigation Compaq had run before it sued. Attached to them were sworn affidavits from 3 former Packard Bell employees. The court's own summary of what happened next is 1 sentence long. Apparently, it says, the letters have resulted in a number of state investigations into the return practices of personal computer manufacturers, particularly those of Packard Bell. That word, apparently, is the courts, and it stays. Attorneys general in 12 states opened investigations in June of 1995. In July, the company settled 9 class actions across 3 states, agreeing to $50 of free repairs, a $1 million fund, and a change to its warranty policy. In September of 1996, it paid $5 million to 22 states and agreed to label computers and monitors that contained used parts. Florida's Attorney General, Bob Butterworth, announced that one. There was no admission anywhere in it. A competitor's law firm had put a regulator on a company through the post. While all of that was running, the money arrived. And it arrived from several directions at once. In 1993, the company sold 19.9% of itself to Group Bull, the French computer manufacturer. On the 31st of August, 1995, NEC of Japan bought 4,040,149 shares of voting convertible preferred stock for 17.026 billion yen. That stake was 19.97%, 19.9%, and 19.97%. 2 different investors, 2 years apart, both stopping a hair under 20%, which is the line above which an investor has to start reporting your losses as part of its own. That November, Intel disclosed that it had converted $470 million of receivables owed by one of its largest customers into a loan. Intel did not name the customer. Analysts at the time said the customer was Packard Bell, and no confirmation of that has ever come. Sacramento wanted the manufacturing badly enough to pay for it. The city of Sacramento lent the company $26 million to bring its operations up out of the Los Angeles area. Then, On the 7th of February, 1996, the company announced it was buying Zenith Data Systems from Group Bull and taking more than $650 million of new investment from NEC and Bull together. Zenith Data Systems was the computer arm that Zenith Electronics, the television manufacturer in Chicago, had sold off years before. It went to Group Bull in December of 1989 for $511 million. It shipped around 650,000 computers a year, and it was run out of Buffalo Grove, Illinois. It sold to corporations and to government. It had a sales force, service contracts, and institutional customers. Everything Packard Bell had ever been good at was selling a sealed box to a family in a shop, with nobody standing next to it. Combined, the two businesses came to about $5.5 billion of sales and the largest share of the American market, at 13%. Alagem said out loud what the deal was for. Packard Bell, he said, had always delivered innovative multimedia systems to the home. Now it would deliver a broad line of products to the corporate customer as well. 5 days earlier, the federal judge in Delaware had issued his opinion. For the next 3 years, the story is one number going in and another coming out, and both are audited, because the company that came to own most of this business had to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission every year, audited by Ernst & Young, filed in the public record. On the 1st of April, 1996, NEC put in 30.7 billion yen. That June, it transferred its own personal computer business into the company, worth 35.27 billion yen, and in July, the name changed to Packard Bell NEC. The following June, another 32.875 billion yen. That December, 19.7 billion yen of convertible notes. In February of 1998, 18.78 billion more. In that same month, NEC exchanged its non-voting shares for voting ones and wrote down what it was holding as it did so, recognizing a loss of 10.663 billion yen on the exchange and a further 19.7 billion on the value of what it still held. In July of 1998, 21.578 billion yen. In August, 10.6 billion. That September, it converted its preferred stock to common, took another 17.792 billion yen of losses doing it, and crossed 52.81% of the votes, which meant that from the 1st of October 1998, it had to consolidate this company into its own accounts. By January of 1999, it held 88.32%. Adding up only the dated cash considerations in that filing gives 240.362 billion yen, put into a company whose entire founding asset had been 2 words bought for under $100,000. That total is arithmetic on the filing's own line items. NEC never prints it. And in the middle of all that money going in, a new company turned up in the aisle. E-Machines was founded in 1998 by 2 Asian manufacturers, Trigem and Korea Data Systems, and it sold personal computers for under $500. By March of the following year, from a standing start, E-Machines was 4th in United States computer sales. Read what that is. A company had arrived on the same shelf, in the same shops, selling to the same families, on the same argument, at half the price. The move Packard Bell had invented was being run against it by somebody with a lower cost base and no 13-year-old reputation to defend. Beny Alagem was already gone. He left in 1998, 13 years after he paid for the name and 1 year before the numbers below were filed. The man who had bought 2 words for how they would sit on a shelf did not stay to watch what happened to the shelf. Now the answer to the question from earlier. Once NEC consolidated the business, the figures stopped being estimates and became audited statements, with a report from Ernst & Young attached, filed with the American regulator. For 1998, they show sales of 461.551 billion yen, a gross profit of 17.857 billion, and a loss of 76.798 billion yen. For 1999, up to the point of consolidation, they show sales of 170.293 billion yen and a loss of 43.413 billion. And between those two lines, in the 1999 column, where the gross profit goes, there is a gross loss of 1.934 billion yen. A gross loss, not an operating loss after salaries and buildings and advertising. Gross. Before a single overhead was counted, the machines were being sold for less than the parts and the labor that went into them. The company that had invented the cheapest shelf in America had reached the end of the argument it started. On a shelf, the price on the front of the box is the entire product. It had spent a decade teaching families to look at that number, and then a company selling under $500 walked into the same aisle, and it could not get beneath them. Alain Couder, who had come out of Bull, was running the company from the point Alagem left. That November, NEC pulled Packard Bell out of the American personal computer market on the 3rd of the month. Forbes reported it on course to lose another $150 million across the year, and Couder resigned at the end of it. An analyst at Giga Information Group, Rob Enderle, was quoted in the same piece. They had a lot of returns and recalls, he said, and as people got bad experiences, Packard Bell got a bad reputation. The walk to the counter, in his account, is what did it. In the year to March 1999, NEC examined the goodwill it was carrying from the acquisitions, decided it was impaired, and wrote off 37.795 billion yen. In the year to March 2000, in the flat language of an annual report, it recorded that the business had decided to close its operation, treated it as a liquidated company, and took a further 15.011 billion yen. Its own description of the decision runs like this. The company withdrew from the personal computer business for the consumer market in North America. The North American business, it says, is now focused only on corporate customers. The shelf was gone. What was left was the sales force, the service contracts, and the institutional customers that had come with Zenith Data Systems 4 years earlier. In April of 2000, the company changed its name again to PB Electronics. The two words outlived the company that had been built on them. The business was sold on, and the name went on sitting on boxes in European shops for another decade. Then everything in this story finished in the same place. E-Machines, the company that had walked into the aisle at under $500, was bought by Gateway 2000 in 2004. Gateway was bought by Acer in 2007 for $710 million. And that deal carried the right to buy Packard Bell ahead of anyone else, which mattered because Lenovo wanted it. Acer used the right, and in 2008, the name became Acer's, Acer. The third manufacturer, the one that was never a party to any of it, pulled into a California courtroom over subpoenas about another company's returned computers. It ended up owning both of them. The name Alagem bought, and the company that had taken the aisle away from him. That is the whole of it. Beny Alagem once bought two words for a sum that would not cover a small mortgage because they sounded like quality on a shelf, and built the largest personal computer company in America on the strength of how they looked in a box. 15 years and roughly $250 billion yen later, with a cheaper box in the same aisle and the machines selling below what they cost to make, the last thing the company had left to spend was the name. If your family's first computer came from a department store or a big box retailer, a Sears, a Wal-Mart, a Circuit City, tell us in the comments what was on the screen when you turned it on. And if you want more stories like this one, the companies that won by changing where the product was sold,